Live stream, please.
Yep. So we're ready to proceed now.
Hi, Michael. Okay, welcome. Shall we start then? Good morning, everybody. Hope everyone's keeping well. You'll have to excuse me a bit. I'm feeling a bit under the weather. I've taken paracetamol, so it should be okay. Have we got any apologies? Everybody's here. We've had apologies from Councillor Chapman. Is there anyone else that should be but isn't able to be here?
There are no other apologies.
Okay, fine. Any different declarations of interest from normal? Nope.
No.
Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of November. I've read them. Has anyone? They seem accurate to me. Is there any matters of accuracy for them?
Nothing from me.
Hugo, Michael, are you okay with them?
Yeah.
Okay. There's the we've been getting invitations and paperwork for the pensions committee. Thank you for that, Peter. And that seems to. There was one other in section 7.4. You were going to check Michael Honeysett about the something being included in the accounts. At page 9 of the paperwork. You're on mute, Michael. Honeysett.
Sorry, apologies. I've overlooked that one. Can I come back with an email response immediately after this meeting?
Yeah, that's fine. Not a problem. That's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. I couldn't find any more actions. Is anyone else tracked the ones that I've missed? No. Okay. Following our usual patterns, I have training and that we're going to do today will be a matter to be thought of soon, and it's risk management today. I don't know who's do that training.
So yeah,
you, Catherine.
Catherine's going to cover off the risk register, and well, obviously it's going to cover the training and also look at links to our actual risk register. So I'll leave that to Catherine.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So
Okay.
I will
attempt
to share my screen. Just bear with me. Right, can you see the slides now?
Not yet. Oh, I got it anyway.
Yeah, they've just come up on
Sorry,
my
is that a yes?
Oh yeah, coming up now. Yeah, just coming up.
Okay. Are they large enough? Can you see them properly?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So what I'm going to go through today, we've got a few slides about risk management, which introduces the amendments that have been made to the risk register. This is the same training that committee had on Monday, which explains the date on the front there, which obviously is not today's date. Now that I'm sharing my screen, I cannot see anyone's video or anything, and I also can't see if anyone's raising a hand. So if anyone does have a question, I'm afraid you will just need to shout, because otherwise I have no way of knowing, I'm afraid. So please do shout as I'm going through. I'm quite happy to take questions.
Old-fashioned, but workable.
Sorry?
Hey. I said good, great.
Going to start the training then with just a little bit of background about risk management, looking at the SIPFA guidance, and then we'll come on to talk more specifically about what Hackney have actually got in place. Just going to start with a quotation. If you don't have effective risk management, you don't have effective management. Does anyone know who said that? I'll take that as a no.
No.
I don't expect you would. It's quoted in the SIPFA guidance, which we are going to come on to look at, but it's actually from... Sorry, I thought that was a question.
Sorry, Catherine, your slides aren't moving on. We're still on the front page.
Okay. I had this problem before at the employer forum. Can you see anyone now?
Yeah, that's it. It's moved on.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I'll just have to. I don't quite know exactly what you can see, but hopefully you can see the actual slide. Okay now.
Yeah.
So this actually came from some guidance published by Solace, which is the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives. And this is actually a quotation that heads up the SIPFA guidance. So we'll move on now to have a look at the SIPFA guidance. So SIPFA, I'm fairly sure you all know what SIPFA is, but just in case you don't, it's the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. And they are responsible for providing guidance around public finance, and it's a requirement that councils, when dealing with their financial affairs, have regard to SIPFA guidance. And there is a special team that's part of SIPFA that issues guidance specifically for the local government pension scheme. And one of the areas of guidance they've issued is risk management. So what we're going to talk about over the next couple of slides comes from that SIPFA guidance. So the first thing they set out is the risk management cycle. Starts with obviously identifying the risk, analysis of the risk, which includes understanding the likelihood of the risk occurring, but also the impact of the risk and giving it a score based on the interaction of both of those things. Moving on to the controls, you would hope obviously that where there's a risk there will already be some existing internal controls, but as part of the risk cycle you might identify new controls that need to be put in place, and then obviously the ongoing monitoring of risks, which can lead to new risks being identified. The SIPFA guidance, hopefully you're looking at a slide now headed LGPS risks with some jigsaw pieces on it.
Yes.
The SIPFA guidance covers various areas of risks that the LGPS should consider. I'm not going to go through each one. I'll just pick out a couple of things. So obviously, assessments is the key one, whether there's market crashes and so on. Employers, you need to consider employer governance. Obviously, that's not quite such an issue for the Hackney Fund, as you know, the main part of the fund is made up with Hackney Council, but it is something that does need to be considered for the smaller employers. Administrative risks. It's not specifically talking about actual functions administration here, so you know the bit that Equinity does for the fund. This is more about administrative procedures overall, so it does include things like business planning, decision making, governance of the fund, that sort of thing. Resources, that includes pension board and pension committee members as well as officers. Obviously it's not just the officers that have to have the right skills and knowledge to undertake roles that they have. Reputational one is an interesting one. I'm sure you're all aware of the Handforth Parish Council meeting that went viral recently with the infamous Jackie Weaver. There's obviously a lot of reputational risks that could happen to a pension fund, so those are the kind of things that need to be considered as well. Moving on then, SIPFA guidance recommends that each fund should have its own risk policy specifically for the pension fund. So obviously the council as a whole will have an approach to risk management, but the fund should have its own, and Hackney does, and we'll look at that in a moment. And then the risk management strategy is set in line with what that policy is. And then obviously the risk register is linked to that, and we will come on and look at that. So another quotation now. Any idea who said this? Risk is like fire. If controlled, it will help you. If uncontrolled, it will rise up and destroy you. There's a bit of a clue in the
We
picture.
can see the answer,
Can you?
Catherine.
I suspected you might be able to. That's the downside of not being able to do the proper screen share. So yes, it was Theodore Roosevelt that said that one, and it's a very valid point. Without controlling the risk, obviously there is there is the danger that it will completely destroy what you're trying to achieve. So moving on to look at the specific Hackney pension fund policy. This was set in June 2015, and it does follow the SIPFA guidance. The overall risk policy, risk philosophy for the fund is it's not desirable to eliminate all risks, and in fact, to some extent, it's impossible. If you think particularly about investments, you can go for lower risk investments where there's no danger at all of losing your money, but of course that has its own risk in that you're not going to make enough money to cover all the liabilities. So from an investment point of view, it's almost impossible to eliminate risk. But what the Hackney philosophy is accepting and managing the risk to ensure that it's at a level that everyone feels comfortable with, given what the nature of the risk is. I'm not going to go through everything on the slide there. The slides will be shared after the meeting, so you can read it a bit more in depth, but there's just a little bit more detail in there about exactly what is in the policy and how risks are identified. One thing just to point out, I'm sure you're already aware, but part of this is that the pensions committee does see the risk register at every meeting. So it is considered every quarter, and then obviously the board sees what the committee sees with the risk register as well. So that's part of the management of this. And another nice quote: "Named must your fear be, before banish it you can." And you can probably tell from the order of the words there, that is Yoda. Apparently in a book rather than one of the films, one of the Star Wars books. The obvious point there is that you must know what the risks are before you can start to manage them. You need to understand what the risks are. So moving on then, hopefully now you're looking at a slide that's got part of the risk dashboard on it. We just wanted to explain how the Hackney risk register works. So you've got the risk register as a separate document, and we will come on to look at that in the report in a little bit more detail in a moment. But the way the risk register is set up is it's split into 3 sections. There's governance risks, funding and investment risks, and then administration and communication risks. So there's a page for each of those which sets out each of the identified risks in detail and what the scores are and so on. But then the Muse produces this dashboard or heat map, we call it. So we just wanted to explain how that works. So we've just got a little bit there of the heat map with the governance risks. So with our risk register, we give each risk there's 2 measures. There's the current score, so based on the likelihood of the risk happening and the impact of it, and that's where the risk, as I say, the current risk is at the moment based on what the current situation is. But then we also set out a target score, which is what the current risk score would ideally be. The target scores aren't all green. That might be what you might expect, because you might think in an ideal world you'd want all the risks to be green, but as we've said, in some cases it's not desirable to try and eliminate all risks. So there are some cases where the target risk is an amber one. So with the risk register, the number, you'll see there's some little squares on that heat map. The number within the square is the number of the risk in the overall risk register. The location of it on that heat map shows what the current score is. So you might see there's a little square there in one of the red boxes. That's risk 6 on the governance page. So that the fact that it's in a red box means that is currently a red risk. You'll notice that the background colour of the square is sometimes a different colour to the overall box it's sitting in, and that background colour of the square tells us what the target risk score is. So for that risk 6, it's currently a red risk, but the target is for it to be amber. And you can also see there's little arrows on there as well, and that shows where a risk has moved since the last time the risk register was updated. So again, you can see that risk 6, it was previously sitting in the amber box, so in line with its target, but it's currently moved to red. And the reason for that is that the governance risk 6 relate to reliance on computer systems and other external systems, and obviously with the recent cyber, that risk has been sort of reclassified at the moment. We then use the smiley faces just to show where the current risk is sitting compared to the target risk. So a happy face is where the current score is the same as the target score, or better than. The sort of medium face is where there's a little bit of differentiation from the target score, and then obviously the sad face is where there's quite a big difference from the target score. And when we come to look at the risk register itself in a moment, hopefully you'll see where those faces are. Hopefully now you're seeing the slide with the 2020 updates. Towards the middle and end of last year, we did quite a big review of the risk register with Hackney, and the Hyman's actuary and investment consultant were also involved with that. They had their feedback into it as well. So a number of the risks that were already there were updated with new controls, new wording. We reviewed whether the the score for each of the risks that was there was appropriate, and some of them were tweaked, and some new risks were also added. Again, I'm not going to read out everything on the slide, and there is more detail in the cover report for the risk register, which hopefully you've all had chance to look through. But just want to pick out really the 4 risks that are currently scored, giving them a red risk score. So one of them, as we've said, is the governance one about reliance on external systems, where that's been moved to a red score due to the cyber attack. The other 3 that are currently red are all in the administration section, and these are all due to external factors going on at the moment. So one of them is relating to poor data. You'll be aware that the McLeod judgment has led to a lot of extra work, and I know there's reports talking a bit more about that, so I'm not going to go into detail here, but that's obviously led to risks. So as well as the poor data one being updated due to its links with the McLeod project, there's actually a brand new risk that's been introduced to the register covering McLeod in its own right. Because it's big, we felt it deserved a risk in its own right, and also another of the admin risks, which is links to external factors affecting the fund, that's also been moved up to red, partly due to McLeod and also partly due to the things around the exit cap, which is what we had the training on last time we met. Just before I move on, are there any questions about those updates at the moment?
No, not for me.
Okay. And the final slide, just another quotation. I won't read the whole bit, but sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk, which I think is very valid and touches on what Hackney's overall philosophy is. And that quotation is Mike Elsmore, who was the chair of the SIPFA pensions panel at the time the SIPFA risk guidance was produced. So are there any questions overall? Just before I take any questions, I would just flag that when slides are circulated, I don't know if you can see me just moving through, but there's just some examples extracted from the risk register, which are those risks I was just talking about, the ones that have moved to red. So you will see that in an appendix when you get the slides circulated. I will try and stop sharing. Oh, so I can see again. So are there any questions? stunned into
Okay, well,
silence.
why don't you talk about the register? Are you introducing the report, or because some of the stuff may come from that?
So the risk register, you've had the cover report, which, as I explained in the training, really just sets out the review of the risk register that was undertaken. You've also got the separate risk register there. So there were, as I said, a number of changes made to the risk register, which the report does set out now how many risks fall into each category. So as I said, there's 4 that are now in the high risk category, 7 in the amber category that hopefully should be green if the target is met, 9 in the amber category where they're actually meeting the target, and then there's 4 risks that are green where the target's green. The risk register itself is also included. So again, hopefully you've had a chance to review that. There's nothing in particular other than what I've already said in training that I'd want to bring out. So I suppose it's really if there's anything in particular Michael wants to mention. Otherwise, if there's any questions.
Mr. Hanisett.
Okay, no.
Obviously reviewed this on Monday, so.
Yeah, no, indeed. I think, as Catherine mentioned, there's the only ones I would draw attention to are the 4 red risks that we've got in the register. And as Catherine said during the training, the first of those is reliance on external systems, which obviously could be an issue for us in terms of that reliance, particularly given the cyber attack. Fortunately, the fact that our pension system is an external system to the councils meant that it actually wasn't affected by the cyber attack this time around. But obviously, the financial, our access to some of our own records, etc., within the council was certainly affected, and we're only just getting some of those back. So that's why that was moved to red, because of that impact and potential there. The other one was poor membership data, which I think we've had many discussions at board about in the past, and the impact that can have both on being able to ensure that we've provide members with their accurate benefits and accurate benefit statements on a timely basis. On that one, I am pleased to say that again at board, over I think virtually every meeting we've had a discussion about the work to develop an interface between the payroll and the pension system. And I'm finally happy to be able to say that I think we're on the cusp of actually getting that finalised now. We've got a test file that's now being reconciled in terms of making sure it's picking up contributions correctly and being able to post those to the pension system. And then over the next couple of weeks, there'll be a further what's the word I'm trying to think of? A further version of that report, which will actually add all the other detail in terms of when people are starting and leaving the organisations, and that will feed through to the pensions. So I think we're in a much better position in terms of being able to improve membership data going forward.
It's probably worth flagging as well. One of the other risks that's currently red relates to external factors affecting the administration and communications of the fund. That was moved to red partly due to McLeod, but also due to the implications of the exit cap, which we were talking about at the last meeting. But the exit cap regulations have now been revoked. The government hasn't actually admitted that it thought it might lose the judicial review cases, but they have revoked the regulations due to unintended consequences, and they haven't clarified what those unintended consequences are. But the regulations have been revoked, so the exit cap is currently not an issue, but it is going to come back on the table at some point. And obviously the hope then is very much that any changes are made to the LGPS regulations at the same time. I don't know if you recall, but the issue was caused because there was some overriding legislation brought in that that clashed with the requirements of the LGPS legislation that hadn't yet been changed. So hopefully when the revised exit cap comes back on the table, all the changes needed to all the bits of legislation will hopefully be made at the same time. The Ministry of Communications, Housing and Local Government, who make the LGPS regulations, are very much making representation to make sure that happens. So hopefully, while that's read at the moment, that may be able to be revisited in the not too distant future.
Hopeful, but given that they were told about the unintended consequences repeatedly over a number of months, years, I don't know that how high a degree of confidence I have that they'll listen about it all. But let's fingers crossed,
Yeah,
they do that.
Indeed. Hopefully, at least they will get two sets of regulations in line with one another this time, regardless of what they might be. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the most depressing one at all being read is core membership data. I think the whole time I have been involved with the pensions at London Borough of Hackney, we've always had core membership data, right from when we brought the data from the LPFA. It's just a constant stream of core membership data being a risk. It feels to me, like there is always something, and it's like it's the correlation of new payroll systems or self-management system, anything like that. It's always that, oh damn, we've got a little bit of work to do on it to make it right for pensions, as though it does always feel like it's an afterthought. But it is what it is. Sorry, I won't rant too much. Anybody else got any comments, questions, howling at the moon on these risks? Anybody want to talk about anything that isn't read?
I just had one comment around poor member engagement, where the target is amber, and I just wondered, if we do get the member self-service portal up and running, is our target not green?
I think I agree with there, actually, Michael. I think we should be, particularly when we bring on that improved portal, that we should be looking to make sure our communications are as efficient and as good as they can be. So I'll take that on board when we refresh and review the risk register again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
that was my only comment.
Thanks, Michael. Hugo, have you got any comments?
No comments from me, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's move on to item 7, which is review of the Pensions Committee work from October to Monday. So there were 2 Pension Committee meetings, 14th of January and the 15th of March. Do you want to add anything to it, Michael or Jackie, or
No,
I don't know who wants to add anything?
Okay. All I'd say is that obviously a large part of the focus of those 2 meetings has been investment strategy, revising the investment strategy going forward, and in terms of the decisions that have been made there, it's moving or reducing our exposure to equities overall, and particularly UK equities, and moving into more global sustainable and low carbon indices, and also trying to ensure that we fulfill the pooling agenda, so the LGPS pooling agenda, by moving more of our assets across to mandates that are actually suitable and managed through the London CIV. So the focus in January was taking some actual decisions around asset allocations, and then on Monday evening, the actual timetable for implementation of those decisions was approved, alongside an overall review of policies, etc., and our processes to do with overall governance, so ESG issues, looking at our approach to things like the stewardship code, climate reporting, and other issues around that. So a lot of the focus over the last 2, alongside other what I'd call business as usual in terms of like the quarterly updates and things. There's something been around the refresh of the investment strategy. Yeah, I'll assume that everything else has been read, and I'm happy to take questions, obviously.
Michael Hartney or Hugo, any questions?
No, I went to the January, so I didn't have any questions. Thank you.
One thing, maybe I've just missed it, and I'll admit I haven't read the pension committee paper in any detail. How's the performance of the fund?
The performance of the fund.
Yes, a small matter of, is it growing the way you expect it to?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, it's been, in terms of the actual assets of the fund, obviously, it's been extremely volatile over the last year, given everything that's going on, both with the pandemic and, geographical politics, etc. But yes, it certainly is growing. I think the current level of assets, so it's grown over the last year from 1.5 billion, and it's now approaching 1.7 billion. In terms of the assets, the funding level did take a dip at the beginning of the pandemic, the first few months. However, it's now recovered back to 92%. So in terms of the funding, so overall, it's in pretty strong state and on target in terms of when we've spoken to the actuary around the impact of COVID, etc. They've expressed that they feel the assumptions we've made are still valid, and we don't need to make any further changes to contribution rates, etc. at this time.
Okay, good. Because I mean, one of the things about I think about the pension board's role is we talked about this yesterday, Michael, but it has to have regard to all of the employers, and whilst the council, of organisation can probably weather some changes to contribution levels or what have you. Some of the smaller employers, that may not be the case. So that's good to hear. Great, thank you. That was my only question.
Okay, thank you.
And what about item 8? That's finance. Item 8, the pension fund business plan. Anything you want to specifically draw our attention to?
No, I mean, what I'd say about the pension business plan is I think we've updated this quite quickly off the back of the last one, actually. But that was just to bring us back into line with so we last updated this, I think it was only in September, but that was delayed from the March meeting that was obviously cancelled due to the pandemic. So we brought this back into line with the financial years really going forward. Part of the pension fund business plan is also, it includes the budget for 21-22, which I'm pleased to say still shows importantly that the fund is expecting to be cash positive still. Obviously that has a huge, or can potentially have a huge impact on the investment strategy going forward, because it does mean we're not having to sell down assets to pay benefits, etc., and we can still strive for that 100% funding. I think other things that we've drawn out in the business plan are particularly things like the procurement timetable for some of the services that the pension fund needs. So it's investment advice and benefits and governance advice, for example, will all be, the tenders for those are due for renewal later this year. The custodian contract we've just extended for a maximum of another year, but we are going to immediate tender under the new LGPS framework. The intention of letting that property over the next 3 months, actually. Other than that, the business plan obviously just ensures that the pension fund is got everything that it needs to be looking at over the next 3 years. I mean, the first year is the more detailed one, obviously, and it's fluid going forward, but it does ensure that the fund and so officers, etc., have got a plan set out to deal with all the issues that need to come to committee and board, etc. I'll pause for questions there, really.
Any questions from Michael Hunter?
I just had one, Michael. I
Yeah.
think it was at the November 2019 board meeting. We discussed the updated guidance, and I think part of that guidance was the frequency of pension board meetings should be, up to 4. And I think Hackney were going to have a look at that. Has that gained any traction? Has any decisions been made around the frequency of meetings?
No, I think we need to bring that back to, well, both committee and board really, in the future. I'm afraid it's that discussion has really been overtaken by the work that's been required due to COVID and things like that. So, but it is, yes, it's something we need to look at in terms of that and any future guidance. I mean, at the moment, the 2 meetings does still meet the statutory guidance in terms of
Sure.
how many meetings the board should have. And I think at that meeting we did discuss whether having 4 meetings would add anything to the board in terms of areas that you're able to look at in that time. So I think that's something that we need to bring back and consider.
Yeah, I think there's a little discussion about maybe increasing it to 3, certainly not 4.
Yeah, no, indeed. What I can do is strive to bring something back to the next board on that.
Thank you.
I thought there was a suggested future agenda for that's for committee, not board meetings. Apologies.
Oh, in the business plan.
Yeah, my apologies.
Yeah, no, the business plan sets out the future agendas largely for committee rather than board itself. Yeah.
I haven't got any comments on it. It looked good. It was clean, and seemed to have a plan, which is what we look for, I think.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Agenda item 9, the major projects update. Is that you as well, Michael? Anissa?
Yep. Let me just open that one up. So this report updates on GMP rectification, and actually the next report gives a lot more detail on some of the actual details around GMP rectification. So we'll look at that in more detail when we come to that report. But also the update on McLeod, which I think we've just touched on during the risk register. I'd also like to give, well, I've touched on it again as part of the risk register, but an update on the interface, which I explained to the chair yesterday. I think I was having a mad moment because I thought I'd include it in this report already, but I haven't. But I will give a verbal update on that one as well. So in terms of GMP rectification, all the work has taken place in order to actually reconcile GMP, the pension fund records to the tax records to ensure that the minimum pensions are correct on members' records, etc. And as I say, in the next report was more detailed the actual outcome of that in terms of numbers and amounts. What we was hoping to have happened by the end of this financial year is the actual rectification. So rectification of over and underpayments would have been actually processed in people's pensions. However, having spoken in more detail to the third-party administrators, so it's Equinity, who would have actually been doing that piece of work, they didn't feel that it was a good time to do it around February, March, largely because it would have ran into the time when the pensions increase is actually implemented on the pension system, and they thought that might very much potentially confuse matters and cause issues. So we agreed that the actual rectifications on under and overpayments would take place in the new financial year at the beginning, so May and June. On the upside, that does give us a bit more chance to actually communicate more, particularly with those pensioners where they've been overpaid and their pensions will be reduced going forward to bring it to make it correct. And it also gives a bit more time to review some of the more outliers, if you like, and you'll see what I mean when we go on to the next report on those. So basically, that project is very much nearing completion, and it's just about now getting the comms out, particularly well to all people, whether they've been under and overpaid. So where they've been overpaid, we'll be setting out what that is, the process that we're undertaking. As you'll see in the next report, we're actually not. Committee have agreed not to actually cover overpayments backdated, but we will put pensions correct going forward. However, we do need to obviously make sure where people have been underpaid that we correct that and provide them with their back pay on those issues. In terms of McLeod, we've got a major project going on that. In terms of, as I said before, the data. At the moment, we're looking at data collection, and different employers are actually submitting their data to Equinity, so that we can start the process of looking at that data and checking what the impact, etc. Major issue with that, as I think, is we do have a potential issue with the council's data. Not all of it. It is basically because of the cyber attack and the point at which we moved to a new payroll. So we moved to a new payroll provider in 2017, and at that time we took a download of the old system, which was going to be there for us to be able to refer back to at any point that we might need to. The McLeod McLeod requires us to look back at that data going back to 2014. Unfortunately, because of the cyber attack, that file isn't currently available to us. They're still working on bringing it back onto the system. So what we're looking at the moment is alternative arrangements to actually bring that data back together for those the years between 2014 and 2017, potentially from data that's been passed to the pension system administrators over those years through the annual returns, monthly and annual returns. In terms of impact of McLeod, our actuary has actually looked at the estimated impact now, and we're just about to start engagement with individual employers on the potential impact. Overall, the actuary has said that so when they did the triennial valuation back in 2019, they was required to make an estimate and take account of that estimate in the evaluation at that point in time. And having done some more detailed work around numbers that might be affected and the impact, they've actually concluded that that estimate was adequate, and there won't be any further impact on the fund overall. So I think the liabilities of the fund we estimated that they would be higher by about 3 million, and that is indeed roughly where we're expecting them to turn out now. In terms of individual employers, 14 employers, it appears, won't be affected at all because they have no employees that meet the criteria for McLeod remedies. And of the others, it's their liabilities or the balance sheet and the liabilities will move by between 0.2 and 1%. And we're currently we introduced those briefly at an employer forum last week, but we're now getting the comms together to talk individually to each employer about those impacts. But again, because of the minimal impact they have, we're not expecting any impact on the current contribution rates. So that's McLeod and the GMP. As I said, the pensions data service, which is what is the interface, is, I think I'm happy to say, as I said earlier, that we have now finally got a file out from the payroll system, which is currently being reconciled to make sure it's picking up correct contributions to be passed across to the pension system. And the idea is that will feed through on a monthly basis, and that any exceptions will actually be picked up by officers and corrected on that monthly basis. So we won't have this issue. we've had in the past, where there's a backlog of issues arising that are found when we do particular exercises. There'll be a proper interface which will throw out exceptions. The next stage of that file testing is to, as I said earlier, to bring in the data around starters, leavers, and all the other information that the pension system requires from the payroll. And that's in development. Hopefully, will be ready for testing over the next couple of weeks. So we're looking to have this file ready, if not immediately in the new financial year, certainly very early on in the next couple of months. So I think that's a major move forward, and that will, I think, finally, we'll be able to say that we've got a much more robust system for updating the pensions data, and that should have a significant impact on the ability to provide things like annual benefit statements on a timely basis and much more accurately. So I'm happy to take questions.
Has anyone got any questions or comments? No? Seems like we've been talking about a lot of these for a long time. I guess they're painstaking. The detail has to be right, and you know, just start eat the elephant one leg at a time type stuff, going through them all, and you just got to be steady. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the next item then? Because I think there's some more detail in there on the GMP stuff.
Yes, indeed. So item 10. So item 10 is really the committee agreed an over and underpayment policy, which was largely driven by the need for us to have a consistent policy, particularly around the GMP rectifications. And obviously, at the time we did that, we thought, well, the fund should have a policy overall on how it deals when you have under and overpayment policies going forward. So this paper sets out the details both of the general policy that was agreed by committee on over and underpayments, and set out a lot more detail, as I said before, around the GMP. So it set out the reconciliation, the details around numbers, etc., and some specific decisions around how we would deal with under and overpayments. So if I talk about, I'll actually talk about that part first, so section 7 of the report. So it sets out the background to the GMP reconciliation, which I think we've discussed before at board. But it sets out that reconciliation process has now been completed. And at the time this report went to committee, so this report went to committee back in January, Equinity were finalising the calculations in relation to over and underpayments. In section 7.6, there's a short summary of the outcome of the reconciliation. And you'll see at the top of page 5, I think it is, yeah, page 5, there's a table there which sets out the value of over and underpayments, and also cases where there was no changes required. So overall, there are 621 cases discovered where there are overpayments, which totaled a sum of 2.5 million. And obviously that's quite a significant sum in the cold light of day, but in terms of the overall value of the pension fund, it's quite minimal. So one of the decisions that was taken at the committee and is part of this policy was that we wouldn't be seeking refund of the overpayments, but we would, in line with regulations, actually correcting the pensions going forward. So the next table there shows the value of pensions increase. This is on an annual basis, the pensions that would reduce, and there's actually 641 of those with an annual saving of 55k to the pension fund, and then 130 pensions would be increasing with a cost of 35,000. So overall, GMP reconciliation has meant a net saving per annum of 220k to the pension fund. So whilst we're not recovering those overpayments, I think will be the reduction in payments going forward will actually obviously offset some of that anyway. And again, we spoke to the actuary about the impact of not recovering the overpayments, and they again confirmed that it will have no overall impact on the funding level of the fund. Obviously, there's a range of decreases and increases. So the next two tables show those. The average decrease in pensions, where there are decreases, is £400 per annum, but the largest one is 2,600. So it's quite significant. And as you can see there, it actually represents 59% of the pension of that pensioner's current income from this pension. So in instances like that, we're just reviewing those cases very, just to make sure that, whilst we're confident they are correct, we're obviously doing additional checks just to make sure that they are correct before we actually start communicating with the members around those particular issues, because they're obviously quite sensitive cases that we need to deal with. There's a table there which shows overpayment ages. Again, as you can see there, the oldest person with an overpayment is 98. Clearly, we don't want to be, just simply sending out a very cold letter to someone of that age saying your pension is going to be reduced by whatever that is. So we need to be careful and sensitive with the comms, and I think that's what we're working on at the moment to make sure they actually hit the right note. And it's actually been agreed that the comms we'd run them through the chair of pensions committee as well before they're actually sent out. So that's some of the detail. The actual appendix to the report shows the full range, so much more detail around these summaries, including the ranges and numbers within each different type of category. So as I said, pensions committee took various particular recommendations in respect to the GMP project, and that was that we would certainly be writing off all overpayments to date for deceased pensioners, and that where deceased pensioners, we'll only be calculating under and overpayments for actual members that are in payment as well. So we won't be looking back pensioners that might have deceased in the meantime and then trying to chase their estates, etc., for refunds. Again, underpaid pension dependents. Obviously, when someone is deceased, if they have dependents, they're then entitled to a pension themselves based on the original pension. What we've said there is that underpaid pensions for dependents will only be calculated in respect of their own benefits, and again, we won't be seeking any repayments, etc., in respect of the deceased person's pension itself. The next recommendation was just an admin one, really. It's about we won't be making any changes to pensions where the change is less than £5. To be honest, there aren't that many of them anyway, where that fall into that category. And then obviously, because of some of the issues that I've just mentioned around sensitivities, etc., and around timetable, officers delegated some of the more detailed points to how we implement that to the pensions manager to decide, and obviously we'd report back on any delegated approvals that we've actually taken advantage of in implementing. So that was the GMP. Outside of that, the actual under and overpayment policy itself, as I say, is designed just to make sure that going forward, we've then got something actually in writing for all employers and employees around the fund's approach to to correcting and managing overpayments and any underpayments on a range of things. So it's on actual benefits going forward, retirement and lump sums, etc., and other areas. So the policy sets out in quite a lot of detail how that will be managed, just so it's recorded and everyone's really treated in the same way, and not, but still recognising that we need to be sensitive in some of these issues and when we are chasing debts, etc. So I'm happy to take questions on that.
Seems rational, the approach you've taken, and there's sort of, small. You've taken that small amount. It seems like a good idea, and I'm surprised we didn't have an payment policy before. Obviously, we've been busy, so it all seems reasonable and have regard to sort of questions we've got. The scheme has to. It's first not consider these issues, but yeah, it seemed reasonable to me. I couldn't think of any strange design.
Yeah, I mean, the policy is really.
Did you want to say?
Sorry, yeah.
So I just wondered, I mean, like Sam says, it all seems very sensible with de minimis payments and not disturbing those particular pensioners. But with those with quite considerable reductions, if they were to raise, a complaint, if I can call it that, have we got the infrastructure in place to quickly review the complaint and resolve it as for the pensioner?
Yes, I mean, it would follow through on the general complaints procedure that the pension fund has in place. For any complaints in the first place, you usually would go through to Equinity. There'd be the in-house team would be aware of those as well. So we have got a complaints procedure in place where it goes through its various levels as required.
Yeah, I know you've got a complaint, but this is maybe a bit exceptional if you're writing to a 98-year-old who might be suffering a 60%. Indeed. Higher priority than someone complaining they haven't received their benefit statement.
No, indeed. I think we need to be upfront on these ones and be quite careful. As I said earlier, be quite careful with our communications, particularly with that type of member. And that's why we're taking our time around those comms and making sure we get those right and engage with members, particularly where they're potentially impacted in that way, up front, to try and avoid any need to even use the complaints procedure even.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Anything, Hugo?
Not from me. I just think, with regards to the older members, vulnerable member procedures should be put in place.
Yeah, I accept it. And as I've just said, we're well aware we need to be very sensitive to people's particular circumstances around some of the, and particularly whether, old or they might be ill, but, all sorts of reasons. And we certainly don't want any decisions around this type of thing to make things unnecessarily worse for them than they might otherwise be. But yeah, unfortunately, we do have in the regulation state that once we know a pension is inaccurate, we are duty bound to actually correct the pension itself. But we've taken, as I say, we have taken that decision, or the committee took that decision, not to then seek any backdated overpayment from people. But yeah, we're fully aware that we obviously need to be very sensitive in comms.
Okay, that's fine then. Thanks. Any other business? Anyone? No. Mario, sorry, I didn't see your note about me going on mute when I wasn't speaking until a while after you sent it. Shout out next time if my quality is bad. I've tried to keep it since I saw it. I haven't got any other items of any other business. I think the board probably should send its best wishes to Rachel, who's off having a baby. So other than that, I'm not sure we did that before. So we should do that. You could just tell her things over. And
yeah, congratulations.
yeah, it was a while ago now. But yeah, we should do that. And when's the next meeting? Sorry, I should know.
7th of October, Chair.
7th of October. Gosh, that seems a while away. Okay. Well, with no other any other business, I'll call meeting to a halt then. Thank you very much, everyone. See you all soon.
Thank you.
Everyone keep safe. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.